I'm Lana Malmsheimer, and I'm interviewing Nancy Datres for the LGBT History Project of Central PA. This is June 19th, 2013. Is that all the relevant information?
I believe so.
I think so. Okay. So, do you agree to have us tape this interview?
Yes, I consent.
Excellent. And after we're done, you will decide whether or not you will give us permission to use the material, and in what ways, and if you want to restrict material. The other thing is that you don't have to answer any question that you don't want to, and you can call for a break at any time.
All right, thank you.
Okay? Please state your name.
Nancy L. Datres,
And birth date and place?
9/8/48, and I was born in the Altoona Hospital, Altoona, Pennsylvania.
I know Altoona people. Your parents' names?
My parents' names, my dad is Paul J. Datres,
Mm-hmm.
and my mother is Mary Ann, middle initial, not all the same name, Mary Ann Wirtz.
Okay. And do you have any siblings?
I have 4 siblings. I was the youngest of 5. The only one born in the hospital. The other 4 were born at home.
And their names?
They're all deceased except one. It was Dottie was the firstborn. Norman was called Bud, and Jerry, and they're all deceased. And the one that's living is Frances. She lives in Illinois, but her and I are pretty much estranged due to my lifestyle and some other factors.
What were your parents' occupations?
My dad only went to school to the 8th grade. He had gone to a Catholic school and did tell us tales about the proverbial tales, but coming from him, I had to believe it. That they really did hit you, on the knuckles or the shins with rulers and so forth. And he decided he wasn't going to put up with that, and he quit in 8th grade, and he went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad as a machinist.
And did he stay in that the rest of
Yes.
his working life?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was a homemaker.
Okay. How long have you been living here in Central PA?
I consider it really where I'm from, although that's not technically true, but I've been living here since 1976.
And did you move here to go to school or after school, or how did you leave Altoona?
Well, actually, you might say I left for fear of my life. I was in a relationship with a woman, but you really weren't out back then, so to speak. I mean, this was like 1972 that I had met the first female that I had a relationship with. And at the same time, I was finishing a degree at Mount Aloysius College up in Crescent in criminal justice. And I've done excellent, had like a 3.9 grade average. And the Altoona Police Department was advertising 4 openings for 4 police positions. And I had applied for one of them, had taken their civil service test, and was like number 3 on the list. And they did go through the motions of interviewing me, but then I was told I wasn't going to be hired. And I was going to let it go, but my partner at that time and some other people felt that I shouldn't, because they felt it was clear sexual discrimination, gender, because they had absolutely no women, and Altoona is known for being behind the times. And so I did. I found a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and during that investigation, while they did not find for me, the commission claimed they didn't find any gender discrimination, which to me was amazing. But they did discover that the Altoona police were bypassing veterans who should have been offered these jobs based on getting their 10-point preference, and because they already knew who they were going to hire when they ran that ad. Well, that blew up all over town. There were, you know, and I was on TV more than once. I was on subject of radio stations. And so for the next year and a half, I was despised in that town. I couldn't walk down the street in broad daylight like this without somebody saying, "You fucking bitch, we're going to kill you," you know, and stuff like that, because they were so angry that I exposed all this about that. You know, it was the proverbial, if it hadn't been for you, you bitch, none of this would have happened, and we could go on doing what we want here at the Altoona Police Department, but you totally upset our apple cart. And I would get anonymous calls during the middle of the night, 3 a.m. So people would say weird things, and often, I think it was always a man, not the same man. And they would say things like, "I put a poisonous snake in your apartment earlier today. Watch out." You know, stuff like that. And you think it's crazy, but then you know you're dealing with crazy people. And plus, they blacklisted me. I couldn't get a job anywhere. They labeled me a troublemaker. They brought out that I was a lesbian. I didn't volunteer that. And
So you were outed by the police
I
department?
was outed by the police department, and meanwhile, the male secretary to the mayor of Altoona at that time was gay. And in fact, he was so worried about all this publicity going on that he left town and got a job at some other city. I don't know if it was Lancaster or where. He left and got away, because I'm sure he didn't want to be pulled into that, because people just weren't out in that town. I mean, Altoona.
What year are we talking about here?
We're talking about now 1975 and 1976.
Okay.
And so I finally left and moved to the Harrisburg area with two gay guy friends. We shared an apartment and was able to get some part-time jobs, various jobs like security guard jobs, and then I got a job at a car dealer. And every time I would apply for a job at the state through their civil service, I wouldn't even get the interview. And so I did wonder how far this blacklisting had gone. And eventually I decided, well, I needed to get go into some other field. This just wasn't going to go anywhere, because applying for anything in law enforcement, criminal justice, probation, parole, which is really where I had hoped to go, probation and parole. I didn't want to be, really a police officer. I had applied for that job thinking that would be a stepping stone to where I really wanted to go. So, feeling that I wasn't going to get anywhere in that field for sure, because they were going to blacklist me no matter what, I went to HAC over here and took their computer courses, and it's straight A's in those, 4.0, and that professor who headed up that department helped me get my first job in the computer field, which was with the city of Harrisburg.
Okay. And what did you do with them?
Computer programmer.
Okay.
And then I also taught the introductory computer class at HAC for 3.5 years.
Okay.
In addition to the full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a long story on how I know.
No,
from
but
Altoona to here, but I think it was important.
Oh, yeah. So you've given us 2 schools that you've gone to. How many years of schooling do you have?
I have a Juris Doctorate law degree,
Okay.
and that is from DePaul College of Law in Chicago, Illinois.
And you did that while you were being a computer programmer?
No, I did this later in life. I didn't go to law school until I started when I was 51, would you believe? And so I was really a late, non-traditional student. And I actually had started at the Widener campus here in Harrisburg. And believe it or not, and this would have been it's 2001. 2001, I started at Widener in Harrisburg, and I stayed there for about 2 years. And I had had enough. And what I mean by that are 2 things. I had enough of the fact that they made the academic program so dull and boring because they required you to take every single course that was on the bar exam. And you did not have any freedom to take electives until like your last year. And this is not the experience I wanted, especially being a non-traditional student. I didn't want that. Secondly, to my horror, really, I couldn't believe that I had classmates harassing me because they suspected I was gay. And they would make comments before class like, well, you know, so-and-so professor, we think she's gay. Maybe you should go out with her. You know, and they didn't even know for a fact whether I was gay because I never truly came out because I've had such negative experiences. I've never been one like to wear rainbow T-shirts or anything, you know, or on my backpack or my purse, nothing. They just speculated because they ask questions. You're not married. Oh, you've never been married. And then black and white. Well, you must be gay. And I got sick of that, and I had taken it to the attention of,
This is at Widener.
of administration, and to me, they really didn't address it. And so for both those reasons, I transferred out to DePaul then. Even though I had to repeat almost a year of credits, it was worth it for me to get away from that environment.
Now, where are we in terms of time at this point?
At this point in time, right, we have a big chunk of area there we need to go back
Yep,
to cover.
yep.
Because this takes us from 2001 to 2006. 2001 to 2003, I was at Widener. I took a semester off, and while I went and visited different college law schools, and then I applied and transferred to DePaul and was out there from 2004 to 2006, and actually lived in Chicago,
Okay.
downtown, for 2 years. Loved
Okay.
it.
Oh. Well, then let's step back. You're leaving your computer job. Why?
Okay. This is a long story, too. Although, if I can I go back just to give some context to what happened in Altoona?
Oh, certainly.
I would like to give this context because I think it's so important, because now, and I'm thankful for this, now gay people have so much support. That's not to say there aren't bad things that still happen to gay people. There are. But for the most part, I mean, just the existence of this center and different groups and the gay straight alliances in schools and so forth. Back in 1973 or 4, when I filed this complaint against the Altoona Police Department based on gender, not sexual preference, there was no protection for that, and still is no protection to my knowledge in Pennsylvania. I had contacted the head of the local chapter of the National Organization of Women to see if they would help me. And they seemed very interested in helping me until they found out I was gay. And then it was like, well, yeah, we can't really get involved in this. We can't really get involved in this. And I was devastated. I was very hurt and angry, although now I understand, looking back and looking at the history of women's rights movement, I can understand why they did that. They called it the Lavender Menace back then. They were, women's rights group were so afraid because that's what the critics would do, to belittle them and to try and cut any credibility they might have. They would call them, oh, these feminists are just a bunch of man-hating lesbians, you know. So they avoided the gay issue. But at the time, it didn't matter to me, because at the time I didn't have that perspective, and I was very hurt that I couldn't get help anywhere. I even wrote to the ACLU, and they wouldn't help me. So I felt very, very alone and very abandoned by organizations that I thought would help me, but didn't. So going back to the computer field. So I'm working in the computer field and teaching part-time as well as working full-time. And this professor, who was head of the computer department, because we're now in the early 1980s, he decided to take a shine to me. I rebuffed his gestures. He was probably, I'd say, in his early 50s. At that time, I think I was 29 or 30. He was married, had an adult son with special needs. His wife, I only learned these other facts afterwards. He married his wife when she was only like 15 or 16, had to marry her, kept her out in a very rural area, never allowed her to get her driver's license, never allowed her to finish her high school degree, nothing. And I didn't know any of this about him. All I knew was he was the professor up there that headed the computer department, and he was in charge of getting people jobs. Because back then, a lot of companies didn't have their own IT department, so they didn't have their own pool of references. So they looked to Hack and this man for job placement. Well, so again, he decided he wanted, to put the make on me, and he didn't stop. I mean, this just went on and on. And to the point where after I'm in the computer field about 3 years, he decides to find out where I live, and on a Sunday morning, in the summertime, Sunday morning, things are peaceful, a lot of people are in church, it's quiet, it's a beautiful day. And I had gone for a bike ride. I was living next to Susquehanna River up in the Middle Paxton, Dauphin Borough area, immediately next. I mean, I could walk out from my yard and walk into the river and go fishing. I lived there with another woman, my partner, and her parents lived in the other half of the house. It was a duplex. We changed it into a duplex. You wouldn't know it by looking from the front of it. There was one door in the front. It was a real old home, and it just lent itself very nicely. Here he shows up and is wandering around the yard calling out my name, Nancy, Nancy, and he's not even drunk. He runs into my partner's parents, and they speak Finnish and some English, but their English is a little bit rough. And they try to explain to him that I went on a bike ride. I'm not there. Who is he? And then my partner came down into the yard and said, well, I'm a friend of Nancy's. She's on a bike ride. What do you want? Oh, nothing, nothing. Just tell her I stopped. I was looking for her. I'll get in touch with her this coming week. Well, what happened then is he told the current employer I had, he called that employer up. I don't have any proof of this, but some things you just know. He called the employer up where he had placed me and said how, I really made a mistake placing her there. I had no idea she was a lesbian. I had no idea she was one of those damn lesbians. You might try to, think of some way of getting rid of her or whatever. So I forget how I did lose that job. I wasn't actually fired for cause. I forget. But I did lose that job. I was, after 3.5 years of part-time teaching at Hack, with excellent student evaluations every semester, all of a sudden that job disappeared too. My services were no longer needed. And then I had a hard time getting a job in the computer field. So he had so much influence in the greater Harrisburg area, everywhere I applied, I just never even would hear from them. So eventually I just applied outside this area, and I applied at Borg Warner in York, which is now York International. And apparently that must have been out of his reach, out of his sphere of influence, because I was hired and I worked there, and I ended up spending about a little over a decade in the computer field. And then I voluntarily got out of the computer field because it just became very boring for me.
And that's when you moved into law.
No, then I moved into writing and journalism. I took Temple has the branch here in Harrisburg, a small branch, and I always loved to write. And I remember in college, I just loved to write, and teachers would ask if they could keep my papers, not just in English literature courses, but other courses, a lot of social type courses where you had to write papers. And stupid me at the time, I didn't think anything of it, and I would say, sure, and I never even had a copy for myself, because a lot of them were handwritten. This may sound bizarre to some people now. Oh my God, they had to handwrite, they didn't have a computer, and I didn't have any copies for myself, and later on in life I was so upset because I thought, why did I not have a copy for myself? But I love to write, so I started taking some journalism courses at Temple's branch here in Harrisburg. And one course was taught by Nancy Eshelman, who worked at the Patriot News and so forth. And so I started doing some freelance work for them as an independent contractor. And then I got a full
Patriot News,
Pardon me?
the Patriot News.
Yes, yes, I covered.
Freelance.
Yeah, freelancing, and but it was fairly regular, although you weren't their employee, you were essentially self-employed. I covered most of Upper Dauphin, schools, school board meetings, municipalities, but I did a lot of feature writing, which I really loved. And I think they knew that and saw that's where my strength was, and they gave me a lot of assignments for feature writing and human interest stories. Then I got hired at the Press and Journal in Middletown, full-time, as a reporter and writer, and they then gave me my own column, which I also wrote, an opinion column, and I loved that job.
What kind of opinion?
Anything you wanted to have an opinion about. But I always picked current events, or things that I perceived were injustices, you know, in the news, like something that would happen and someone would be found guilty of this, but someone else who did something, in my opinion, even far more serious was...
So what's our time period here?
Our time period here is I want to say 1992 to 1997. Somewhere right in there.
This is after you had a law degree?
No, this is still before.
Oh, okay.
And when I left Press and Journal, reluctantly, but it's small papers. They were a weekly paper. They don't have much of a budget. I mean, they really don't. I love the job. But I was hoping, well, I could go on to something, a daily paper, and I got hired at the York Record in York, Pennsylvania. But I worked there only, I think it was 4 months, and it had been bought out from some other company, and that's when all this was going on. Newspapers were being bought such that the eventual outcome was newspapers were basically owned by a handful of companies. And I was let go with a few other people who had just recently been hired. So I'm back thinking, now what am I going to do, you know? And this takes me to, I'm looking at ads in the paper, and I saw this ad for the state, just said the State House. They needed a writer. I thought, well, I'll apply for it. And I did, and I got hired, and it turned out to be the Republican House of Representatives. So I worked there for 5 years, so 1996 to 2001. I worked at the House of Representatives, the Republican caucus, which was interesting since I myself am not a Republican. I am not proud to admit I did hurry up and change my registration because I needed the job and I didn't want to be let go. But it was difficult. It was very difficult writing. I had about 10 lawmakers assigned to me, anywhere between 10 and 12. Each writer had about 10 or 12 lawmakers assigned to you. You not only did their writing, their newsletters, you also coordinated setting up press conferences when they were introducing new legislation. You would write the press release. You would have press packets that you would do to hand out to people who attended and explaining the law in hopefully plain English so the average person could understand it.
So you weren't writing legislation?
No, I apologize if that's what you thought. No, writing, not legislation, no.
Public relations in a sort of broad way.
Essentially, yeah, public relations, yeah. That would be a more accurate description of it. And it was from there that I ended up going to law school because at that point I was with a partner, and the job had gotten so horrible the last year of it because then they were taking away any freedom we had to decide what to write for a lawmaker, even though the lawmaker would approve it. Instead, they were coming up with these canned things, and we were supposed to just change a few words so it would be specific to that lawmaker. Well, you can imagine how boring that was and tedious. So this friend of mine said, you know, Nancy, you always loved law. You know, you keep telling me how when you went to Mount Aloysius College and you had to take a couple law courses, you just loved it. Why don't you go to law school? You shouldn't let your age or the lack of money deter you. So, foolishly or not foolishly, I jumped in, you know, and that's when I went to law school at Widener and then took a semester off and transferred out to DePaul.
Mhm. So I think we have your work history in some ways here, don't we?
Yes. And also.
Were you ever married?
No. I was engaged 5 different times, but never went through with it.
Any children?
No.
I'm going to say you don't have any military background.
That's correct.
Memberships in community organizations, professional organizations.
Well, I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Bar Association, Dauphin County Bar Association, and I'm a member of the LGBT Center.
When did you first realize you were a lesbian?
I probably really realized it when I was probably about in 8th or 9th grade, because I had such crushes on 1 or 2 girl friends. Even though I was dating guys and going to the dances and looking forward to dancing with certain guys, I mean, these crushes I had, and then I had a crush on one of the female teachers, and they were just so strong, but I never knew what it was. I mean, this little town that I came from, Bellwood, is on the outskirts of Altoona, and there were only 104 people in my graduating class. I would have no idea what it even was that I was feeling or how I could even go about finding out or anything. But I really think that somewhere inside I knew at that early age, because of that feeling I had towards female students, and that female teacher just was nothing I ever felt with a guy.
Mhm.
No matter if I dated a guy and really liked him or not, I never had that feeling.
So then when did you come out?
Well, in some ways, I would have to say I'm not sure if I ever completely came out.
Well, you certainly have.
Well, I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, I haven't and haven't fully, though. What do I mean by that? The first time, or the first person I met was in 1972, a woman, and this was when I was in Altoona, and we dated, and we went to a gay bar there. I think it was called the La Pierre, and danced and so forth. And then when she and I broke up, I went there by myself a couple times. And actually,
And you're how old now?
now I'm 64.
No.
Oh, back then. Yeah, back then I was not 64. Back then I was young and wild. Let's see, I would have been about, I was born in 1948. I would have been about my mid-20s, 25, 26,
Okay.
somewhere around there. And so I'm pretty shy. Even to this day, I'm pretty shy. Not as shy as I used to be. But I decided to go to that bar because what was I going to do? We had broken up, and I went out, and I noticed how a lot of cute women were sitting in the booths, kind of by themselves. And in the back room where there were 2 pool tables, there were other women congregating. And I'm still very new to all this lifestyle. Even though I've dated and been with one woman now, I'm still pretty green at everything. So, I don't know, then a song comes on the jukebox that I really liked, and I went over and asked one of these cute girls in the booth to dance. And we danced, and then I'm sitting at a booth at the bar, and about 10 minutes later, somebody is standing beside me, and they pound their fist down, and they said, "Look, you better make up your mind which you are, a femme or a butch. Don't you ever ask my girl to dance again." I was scared shitless. I thought, oh my God, you know, what am I going to do here? You know, I mean, I just became totally horrified because I never had anybody say that to me before. And so in some ways, even in the gay community, and even when I moved to Harrisburg, after leaving, you know, being blacklisted by the Altoona police, moved to Harrisburg in 1977 and shared an apartment with two gay guys, started going to the gay bar up on Front Street, the D-Gem. My hair was long. I liked it long. It was, you know, not long down my back, but it was long here, and my natural color is red, and I just liked it long. And started going to that bar. As soon as I got to that bar, I mean, there were people telling me, "You're not gay. Or you're, if anything, maybe you're bisexual, but you're not gay." So I never really felt that embraced by the gay community, because I guess for some reason I didn't fit into what they felt were the stereotypes that had evolved in the gay community. And I didn't fit that, and therefore, in some ways, I felt discriminated against by my own community in some ways, because I constantly ran into this, and it wasn't friendly. It was kind of nasty, you know. It wasn't out and out nasty like, "Oh, we're going to push you or take you out back and beat the shit out of you, or because you're just pretending to be gay." But it was, you know, I could tell I was being rejected, and that was not fun. But
At this time, you're with a partner?
no, at this time, I'm sharing expenses with two gay guys, and I'm single. And I wasn't going to stop going to the bar because I was hoping to meet someone. I'm only in my 20s.
You want to hold?
Sorry, it was
What do you need?
Oh, I just wanted to say hi. I wanted to stop down and check out the gallery a little while ago. And my friend Adrian.
Well, I'm sure you'd be welcome. Go, step back, and Pat, who is part of the staff here, is in the back room back there.
Great.
Okay?
Yeah. Which direction is that?
Straight back.
Straight back?
So you're answering these questions.
Yeah, I'm saying that I went to the gay bar here in Harrisburg and even felt rejected, as I did at the bar in Altoona, because I didn't fit into, I guess, what the gay community at that time considered their acceptable roles. R-O-L-E-S, not R-U-L-E-S, although I guess it could have been both, really. So I didn't have a real positive experience outside of the gay community or inside of it. But finally, I did meet someone at that bar. It's kind of an interesting story. She was this little long dark hair, blue-eyed girl who often would be sitting up at the bar by herself too on a stool. And she struck up a conversation with me because I was sitting not that far away. And so we were meeting there at the bar and thinking, you know, that we were dating essentially, was that we would go out in the parking lot and do whatever young gay women do in the parking lot in your car, and kissing and carrying on. We didn't have too many places to go, you know. And then now we'll walk.
So you met somebody at the DJ?
Yes, I thought we were dating, and you know, and I just assumed she was single. She certainly presented herself as being single. And then one time, after about a month or so, she asked me if I wanted to come to her apartment and share dinner with her and a friend. They share expenses. And I said, sure. So I went and had dinner, and just to get to the short of it, that was not her friend, that was her partner. But the interesting thing is, and this is probably shocking to some, but I hope not, we ended up sort of having a threesome for about 2 months. But then her partner and I fell in love. And so she had to leave.
And then the two of you became partners and lived together and so forth?
Yes, we were, at that time, she had an apartment in the basement of someone's house near Mechanicsburg, a gay woman who owned the house. And I had an apartment in Middletown, and we fell in love, and we got together, and then we started looking for a house, and we bought a house up in Middle Paxton Township, right next to the river. It was beautiful, I mean, because you sit on your porch and you can see the geese in the summertime, and the Canada geese, the white egrets, everything, and I like to fish, so I would just go out fishing, and we bought a canoe, and we'd go out in a canoe. It was wonderful. We were together about 20 years. In fact,
So that was sort of your coming out then.
well, see, this is why I say I'm not sure I fully came out, because that was the time when I'm in the computer field and I'm not letting anyone know I'm gay. It's only that professor who came to the house on a Sunday morning screaming out my name when he was totally sober. You can't even give him an excuse for being drunk. That, you know, he decided, yes, I was gay because I lived with another woman, blah, 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 blah. My partner and I at that time, Rita, and she was born in Finland, had come to the United States through South America. Her parents had to go there first because of the Finno-Russian War, and her dad had to leave the country for safety reasons, because he and some other soldiers were stashing arms after the war was declared over, because they didn't believe the war was over. And so he went to South America, got a job, saved some money, and sent for Rita, her sister, and the mother. And they had to stay there until they had so much more money so they could come to the United States through Ellis Island. So she and I, as I said, we just fell totally in love. I just never felt about anyone the way I felt about her. I never had that feeling. In fact, we're talking 78. We actually got married. Well, it's a union. It's a certificate of holy union, and it was at the Metropolitan Community Church in Baltimore. And we did have to go and meet with the minister, and had to wait like 6 months and then go back. So this wasn't like they were just doing it, you know. And we had to show like that we had an apartment together and utility bills and so forth. And yes, and we got married, and we had a few pictures. These probably aren't going to show up too well, because I don't know if they're going to show up because of the glare on there. But and as you can see, it's about 10 or 12 years later, the pictures got torn in half during a horrible argument. But all couples argue, and I'm sure there are many, many heterosexual couples out there with pictures torn, maybe even burned to ashes. But clearly we felt strong enough to salvage them, you know, and keep them.
We can try to get some shots of this stuff
Okay.
when we're finished.
Okay.
So clearly had a big impact, coming out had a big impact on your family life and on your work life, and
Oh, my God. on my
having
work
been
life.
outed.
But you know, interesting, not my family life. My mother and dad did not at all reject me. In fact, I told my mother on a Christmas Eve, we had this family practice ritual. Every Christmas we'd go and visit the relatives. It used to be they would come to our house, but when my parents got older, we started going around to my different siblings and their family and other relatives. And so I was helping her go up a flight of steps, because she had arthritis pretty bad, to go to the bathroom, to pee. And for some odd reason, that's when I told her. I know why now, because she had given me such a hard time. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go. I wanted to spend Christmas Eve with my girlfriend, the first woman I was with. And she just, you're going, we've been doing this for years, just blah, 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 this is crazy, this is crazy, you're going. And so I did go, and of course I was upset. But when I got her upstairs and told her then, while she was on the bathroom, whizzing away, and I said, Mom, you asked earlier, why did I want so much to spend the night with Shirley tonight instead of coming out on this family ritual? Because I'm in love with Shirley. And my mother sat there and she said, I've read about things like that in books, but I never knew anyone for real. And I said, well, now you do. And she said, yes, now I do. She said, well, that's okay. And that was it. And my father never said anything either. He always was anxious to meet the women I was with, would shake their hand. And he just loved Rita, the person I was with for 20 years. He just adored her. So it was interesting that I had no problem from my family except the one sister who lives in Illinois, the only one who's alive, who had nothing to do with me. But I had all of these problems in employment because of my sexual preference. Tremendous problems. I can say all of these problems I encountered in employment set me back financially significantly because I had to change. I had to essentially, what's the word I'm looking for? The caterpillar's stew. I had to morph into something else, or at least I felt I had to, 3 different times in my life to escape careers where I had been blacklisted. Been blacklisted from the criminal justice field by the Altoona Police Department. I then got blacklisted in the computer field by this professor over at Hack. And it just, I just continually had to, or felt that I had to reinvent myself in some other field to survive. And that's why to this day I have financially I am not in a very good place being this close to retirement because I never could stay anywhere long enough to build up, pensions and so forth. So it was very devastating to me employment-wise, being gay.
Has being gay affected your civil and political life?
No, not really. I've never been real active in politics. I mean, I vote, but I've never done any campaign work. I take that back. I did some campaign work one time for a female candidate who was running for the House of Representatives. She was a Democrat, and I can't remember her name. But I did do some political campaign work for her.
How about your spiritual life?
No, it didn't affect that because by the time I was about 8 or 10 years old, my mother had divorced my dad. My dad came from a very strong Catholic family, and so my oldest sister and brother were raised Catholic. He had been an altar boy. They'd had the communion and all that. I have all pictures from all that, that I saved. And but the last 3 of us, there was like a 7-year gap. And in the meantime, my mother, and I have a lot of respect for my mother doing this, because women didn't do this in this would have been about 1956. She filed for divorce because of the abuse. My father was physically abusive when he drank, and he was a binge drinker. If he wasn't drinking, he was okay, but he was a binge drinker, and almost every weekend he would come home plastered. And she filed for a divorce, and it was hard to watch this. I know I'm digressing a little bit, but I feel I have to put this in here because it also, I mean, anybody struggling for rights is important to our struggle. So there she is, a woman who in the mid-1950s takes the initiative to file for a divorce from an abusive husband. And the world seems to turn against her. Her own family wouldn't even help her anymore financially. And she had to work, and the only job she could get back then, even though she graduated with honors from high school, was very high IQ. She could only get jobs like at a chicken factory or a shoe factory. And there were 3 of us to raise. And it got really tough for her to the point, you know, again, where her family would not help her, would not speak to her, that she attempted suicide. And that has never left me, because she had
How old were you?
given me the note, you know, I didn't even know what it was. We were in an apartment, and we had gas stove, and she said, take this up to your grandmother's and hurry. And my grandmother lived probably, I'm going to say about 3 miles away. I had to go up through some alleys, and I'd say at least 2 to 3 miles away. And I remember, even though I didn't know what was going on, I was running as fast as I could. And I apparently did get there in time. I gave the note to my grandmother, and I still didn't know what it said. And my grandmother and then my mother's brother and my sister went down there and got her. And she was going to kill herself because she had been just pushed in the corner and left so alone. You know, when all she did was try to get a divorce from someone who was abusing her physically, mentally, every way possible. And that's, I don't know, that just always stuck with me.
Mm-hmm. What changes have you witnessed or participated in regard to the LGBT community in Central PA?
Well, I don't know if it made any difference, but in Central Pennsylvania, I think Rita and I probably were the first people to file a lawsuit against neighbors who were harassing us because of our gender. Not our gender, right? Because of our sexual preference. And when I say they harassed us, I mean it was relentless.
This is when you were living near the river?
This is when we lived near the river. It's like a one-way street. The cars pull over so another street can pass, kind of that kind of politeness on there. So it's a very narrow, and there are probably about maybe 40 houses along there. And then there's this little street, and then there are railroad tracks, and then there's 322, the highway. And 2 women, the one is married, and she's still alive, and her husband, and then her friend who bought the house immediately next to her, and they had been lifelong friends, according to them, just friends. But the 2 of them decided to harass us because we were 2 women living together. To give you some idea of how extensive it went, we both loved to stay physically active, Rita and I. We did a lot of bike riding. We would bike ride a lot from where we lived next to the river clear down to Shycoke. So we had to, at one point, get out on that highway before we got down on Front Street and get on the bike path. They would wait for us down on a road close to where they knew we would be getting on the highway, and it would be summertime. of course, not riding our bikes in the winter. And they would have their windows down, and, you know, a lot of people would have their windows down, and people had convertibles and whatever. Not everybody had air conditioning on. And they would scream to the top of their lungs, "Pussy eaters, pussy eaters," and they would just continue that until we could finally get on that bike path and get away from them. They sent mail to Rita's place of employment that had a picture of a nude woman lying on a beach with long red hair. And Rita had a very, very good position. She's a registered architect. She worked for the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And she had a type of position where, you know, there was a receptionist as a buffer. Well, the receptionist didn't know. This was just in a big brown envelope. It wasn't marked confidential. She opened it like she would open anything else. And so saw this, and they wrote on there, "Does this look like your lesbian lover, Nancy?" And so she was outed at work by these people. And then the one woman, Emily, who is not married, she followed me in the morning on a weekday down Front Street. I was going to my job, and I was very worried about this. I didn't understand why in God's name was she following me. It was like 7:30 in the morning, and why was she doing this? I mean, they're harassing us, but I didn't expect this. So I didn't want her to know where I worked, and I pulled in a parking lot of an insurance building on way up in North Front Street. She pulls in too. And it's just her and I, because it's a little bit early in the morning. Some workers aren't there yet. And she takes a handgun out of her glove compartment and points it at me from her car to mine. At that time, someone reported to work, and they saw it. And so I filed a complaint with the district justice. These people are very politically connected. She kept asking for a continuance for almost a year and a half before we actually had the hearing. And the witness, though, still remembered that, because how often do you pull in a parking lot and see someone pointing a gun at someone? You know, that's not something you forget. And she still remembered it, and she still showed up for the hearing. She came because she was going to testify to what she saw. Well, Emily went to the district justice first. We saw her car already there when we got there. When we went in and thought that we would get a chance to testify and our witness was there, the magistrate said, "Well, it's my understanding that you and Rita Lucari have a civil suit you filed against Miss Sanford and some other people. Therefore, we're not going to hear this case. It could be handled by the civil suit." Wouldn't even hear it. Wouldn't even let us testify. Oh, I was so livid, so livid. But, yeah, we filed a lawsuit, civil lawsuit against them. Clearly, we weren't going to get anywhere criminally. They put up signs at the end of the roadway up there, big white signs about as big as one of these pictures on the wall, about this big, hung them at the end of each road, the entrance to that road where we live, and said, you know, 2 lesbians here, 12 River Road. They sent a letter, I don't even remember what was inside it, a piece of mail will say, to Rita and I through the regular United States postal system. It was addressed, 2 lesbians, 12 River Road, Dauphin, Pennsylvania, 17018, and it was delivered. Rita made an appointment to speak to the postmaster. At that time, the main office was in Harrisburg, down on, no, it's not Walnut Street, but it was down Harrisburg as opposed to where it's at now, out by the Farm Show building. Postmaster did nothing about it and basically said, well, I'm sorry, it had the address on 12 River Road, and so we were able to deliver it. There's nothing we can do about it. We also had to call the state police on them because they would do things like scratch and key our cars. They would they'd throw and break eggs in front of our garage. The garage was detached from the house, so it was about 500 feet away from the house. They would throw dildos on our porch, and it just all sorts of craziness. And so the one time, I can't remember what they did, they threw something at the door or on the porch, and we called the state police, because that was who protects Middle Paxton Township. So now we're in 1986, 87. And the response is not too different from the postmaster of the United States Post Office. Police officer comes in, we tell him what happened, what they did, and he's standing in our kitchen and he said, well, you can't prove it though, right? You have a picture that they did this. Yeah, well, obviously we did. We just had each other, and they're denying that they did it. That we weren't down there, we weren't anywhere near them. And how it's concluded then is the state trooper says to us, well, don't you kind of expect this when two women living together? So you can see my experience with being gay has been very, very tough. Very tough. And sometimes that's why I'm hoping this project gets some of those interviews out there, not just the ones where everything has gone smoothly, which I'm glad it has gone smoothly for some people, but I think the story needs to be told about the hell that some of us have gone through because of our sexual preference. And I hope that story gets out there, because we need to remember that. Just like as women, we need to remember the women's rights movement, as minorities and women, we need to remember the civil rights movement. We all need to remember those who essentially were I hate to use the word martyr, but were the sacrificial lambs, so to speak, of the movement, and who really suffered financially and otherwise because of our sexual preference. Mm-hmm. Even though we weren't out. We didn't have stickers on our cars back then, little rainbows. We didn't have, any kind of stickers or rainbow shirts. We didn't do any of that because we were afraid to.
How much were you aware of that, of the civil rights efforts that were going on and so forth? Even though you weren't participating. Yeah.
Yeah, I was very much aware of it. In fact, one of my friends, female gay friends, sometimes would come down on me because I wouldn't get involved with it. And I would try and remind her all that I have already been through. And couldn't she please understand why maybe I just can't get back in the ring again and take any more? Maybe I've been beaten down enough already. I just can't. It's not that my heart's not there, my spirit's not there, and I'll do volunteer work. I don't have a lot of money that I could donate because I suffered financially because of my sexual preference. But she was very hard on me, and she, to this day, I think she still thinks I should be more, I should have done more during that time period. And I don't think she really understands what I went through, because of my sexual preference.
Mm-hmm. What challenges do we still have, do you think, in central Pennsylvania?
I think, we still have challenges, and I think we always will. I say this because I say it, first of all, acknowledging that we've made tremendous progress, just even having this center here, having the gay, straight alliances at schools so kids now can go somewhere, and if you're feeling the things that I felt towards a female classmate, those strong feelings, and you can go somewhere and get some education and try and, find out what's going on. Why are you feeling this way? We've come a long way as far as some states allowing marriage, even though it's not recognized in other states, nor recognized by the federal government. And of course, as we all know, sitting here, I think there are two cases right now before the Supreme Court. It'll be interesting to see how those are decided. We've made a lot of strides, but I guess I am cautiously optimistic because where the bigotry still can be so obvious is on the internet, because you have the ability to be anonymous when you make comments. And it's not just bigotry against us that's still alive, it's bigotry against minorities. That poor young Mexican boy who sang the national anthem last week at some sporting event, I believe, and people were writing comments, anonymous again, you know, how dare they, you know, he's not, how dare he be allowed to sing our national anthem? He's a Mexican. He was dressed in the attire because he wanted to wear his attire from his country. If you pay attention to comments like on Penn Live, on different articles and everything, the bigotry, we have made advances, but you know what? We need to be careful because that bigotry is still out there and it's seething. It's seething. And where you see it is the anonymous, because now some of them who hate minorities, gays, and so forth, won't be obvious about it because they're afraid they'll get arrested or whatever. But you see it in all that anonymous posting.
What have been the most important events of your life?
Most important. Well, I have to say the events kind of are what I've told you, and they aren't positive, unfortunately. They're negative ones. In fact, I even forgot one. The first woman I was with in Altoona, her aunt and uncle, who lived in Camp Hill and still do if they're still alive, filed a lawsuit in Cumberland County Court and took away her 4-year-old daughter because of her being gay, and took away and got custody. And this was an aunt and uncle. It wasn't even the
What year was that?
That would have been 1974, somewhere around there.
I seem to remember that.
And yes, and they the court gave them custody and all because of this. And
Because you were together, the
because
two of
we
you.
were together.
Well,
Because-
now how was that, working that through that with your partner?
That's hard, because you know what? You always feel that you're to blame for her losing custody. I mean, yes, she could go visit once a month or however many visitations she was given, but it made me feel horrible, because if I hadn't been with her, they probably wouldn't have done that. But of course, if it hadn't been me and it had been some other woman, they would have done it too. But still, it's very hard, and I'm sure that's part of the reason we didn't last, because it was very hard for me, and I'm sure it had to be hard for her. She's this child's mother, and the child's taken away from her. So
How old was the child?
4 at the time. So the important events, unfortunately, are kind of the traumatic things I've experienced in life as a result of my sexual orientation.
And would you say those are the turning points too, where
Yes,
things change?
they are the turning points as well.
I see you have some documents here. We'll try to make copies of those. We might do that one of several ways, but
All right.
is there anything we missed? Anything else you want to add to the interview?
I think the only thing I'll probably add again is, or clarify, why I still don't consider myself fully out, okay? Well, I think based on all this negative stuff that I've told you, you can kind of see where I never reached a point where I felt comfortable at any workplace, even after I got my law degree and worked for Mid-Penn Legal Services, which has several
And we haven't
gay
talked about
employees.
that at all.
No, we did not. I worked there for 5 years, and they have several employees who are openly gay. But I never, even though I was in that environment, I never ever came out to anyone. I never said, yes, I'm gay. I'm sure they speculated it, because I don't They don't see a boyfriend coming to take me out to lunch or anything of that nature. I don't see any pictures in my office of traditional heterosexual family pictures. But to this day, I mean, you don't even see anything on my car. And it's not because I'm not with the movement. I am with it. I guess I've just been hurt so badly so many times that I just feel I can't do that. You know, and it's not a good feeling because I want to be able to do that. I wish I could still feel free enough to put a picture in my office if I were still working of myself and my partner when we were together. We're no longer together. I'm no longer in a relationship. But I never felt that comfort factor despite the fact that here we are now in 2013. But to me, that doesn't mean the comfort factor isn't there for people. To me, it is there for a lot of people. It's not there for me because of what I personally experienced. It has nothing to do with, we have made great advances in our movement and the fight for our rights and to be recognized as human beings. I just, because of my own personal experience, can't become comfortable with being completely out.
What would that mean to you, being completely out?
Well, it would mean I would feel the freedom to maybe have a little rainbow flag at my house, you know, in my garden or something, or have something, a decal on my car, and be just more open like that and so forth. And I'd like to believe I'll get there before I leave this world. I'd like to believe I will get there because I am hoping to open up a solo practice through a website, mostly a virtual law office. I'm trying to look at that. And I know when I do that, I'm not going to hide that I'm gay. I'm not going to put a big rainbow on the website, but I'm never going to deny anything about, and I'm going to certainly help non-traditional families with any legal issues they have.
Did being gay affect your life at legal services in any direct way?
Although they have people there who are openly gay, I never sensed a welcoming about it. And I didn't know if that's because I'm older, or is it because I'm not in a relationship with somebody and that makes some people uncomfortable. I don't know, but I never felt that comfort factor there, even though, like I said, there are some employees who are openly gay. I just never felt it.
And there wasn't any direct problem?
No.
Did any legal issues come up that were really specific to gay people?
No, unfortunately, no. I say unfortunately for me because I would have loved to have helped,
To work with
with people, right, exactly. Although, when I look back on it, I believe, and I have to be careful here because the attorney-client confidentiality, I know, I suspect there were probably a couple foreclosure cases that I defended that they may have been a gay couple, but just didn't disclose it as such.
Anything else you want to tell us? Or the world, for that matter?
The world, for that matter. It's hard being single when you're this age, and I wonder if it's this hard for straight people. You think it is? Maybe, I don't know, maybe we all need to put our heads together and think of something we can do for older, single, gay people to help them meet people and friends, and if it becomes more.
I think that's what's being
Yes.
tried in some of the
Yes.
activities here.
Right.
Do you have any recommendations for other people we should ask to interview?
I still believe we should interview Marlene Koenig. I think the only reason originally she said no to me is because she was operating under that false premise that had gotten out there that we only wanted people who were in central Pennsylvania
From birth.
from birth
Yeah.
or wherever. I think she would be a good one. I will ask my former partner.
She's been
Rita.
real active, hasn't she?
Marlene Koenig has
Yeah.
been extremely active, and I would think she'd be a great person to interview. I'm not sure if my partner would want to be or not. I can ask her, but definitely Marlene Koenig would be a good person to start with. And she may have additional names because she is so involved in the community.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.